Welcome back. In this video, we look at the case of the Gonzales family murders. In 1977, in the Philippines, Teddy Gonzales, a lawyer, and his wife, Loiva, were married. In 1980, they had a son, Sef, and in 1983, a daughter, Claudine. The family built a new 40-room hotel in Baguio, the Philippines, but it was destroyed during an earthquake in 1990. Then, 10 years old, their son Sef tried to escape the crumbling building, but his foot became caught in rubble and he was trapped. His father Teddy heard his cries and bravely climbed through the rubble, pulling Sef to safety. But the family had lost their home and their business and decided to start a new life in Australia, where Loiva had family. They settled in Sydney and, after Teddy requalified as a lawyer, built up a successful law firm. They purchased a plot of land in the northern Sydney suburb of North Ryde and built their dream home. They were a close-knit family, but Terry and Loiva were strict parents with high expectations for their children, particularly Sef, who they hoped would follow a career in medicine or law. After attending Marist Brothers High School in Parramatta, Sef studied medical science at the University of New South Wales, but withdrew after 2 years. He then enrolled in law at Macquarie University, but a lack of motivation saw him perform poorly in his courses. He wanted a career in the music business, imagining himself as a famous pop star. At the risk of expulsion, Sef covered his failure by falsifying his grades. His sister, Claudine, later revealed the truth to their parents, who threatened to take away Sef's prized possession, his car. When Terry and Loiva discovered that Claudine, who was still in high school, had been seeing a boy, they sent her to stay with family in Melbourne to continue her studies. Sef also had arguments with his mother over a girlfriend she disapproved of, and he was at risk of losing his inheritance if he continued to see her. Some family and friends described Sef as having a penchant for stretching the truth and outright lying to impress people. He imagined himself as being a successful businessman, model and singer. He told friends that he had a recording contract back in the Philippines and that he modelled for Calvin Klein. A website supposedly run by the daughter of a family friend, Daisy Diaz, as a fan page or tribute to his good looks and talent, was discovered as being, in fact, set up by Sef himself. Others remarked that he had a narcissistic personality and was a compulsive or pathological liar. But no one suspected just what the baby-faced Sef was actually capable of. At around 4 p.m. on July 10, 2001, 21-year-old Sef left the family's law firm where he worked part-time and headed home. 18-year-old Claudine was at home for the school holidays. It is known that she was still alive at 4:04 p.m, as she sent a text to a friend at that time. Around 4:30 p.m, armed with a baseball bat from his car and with 2 kitchen knives from a knife block in the kitchen, Sef entered Claudine's bedroom and attacked her from behind while she was studying. There he compressed her neck while trying to strangle her, then struck her head with the bat at least 6 times. The bat was swung with such force that it left dents in the wall. Blood smear showed that Claudine had slid down the wall and slumped to the side. Defence wounds suggest Claudine saw her killer. Sef then stabbed her multiple times with one or both of the knives, inflicting 5 major stab wounds to her neck and 2 major stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. Then he waited. About an hour later, at 5:30 p.m, 43-year-old Sef Gonzales arrived home from the office. She also worked as a receptionist with her husband at the legal practice. The killer struck as soon as she entered the house. Sef didn't even have time to put down the shopping bag she was carrying before multiple stab wounds were inflicted to her face, neck, chest and abdomen. In a final aggressive act, her throat was slashed after death, completely severing her windpipe. Like Claudine, Sef would also have seen that this was her own son who was stabbing her. Sef then tipped out the contents of her handbag in an effort to make the attack look like a robbery. Her body was left in pooling blood on the lounge room floor, while her killer again waited. But at around 6 p.m, he was startled when he saw the headlights of a car coming up the driveway. Sef's sister, Emily Luna, and her son were unexpectedly visiting the house. Emily was surprised that there was no reply when she knocked. She noted Sef and Sef's cars in the driveway, but the house was dark and unusually quiet, especially given that the family kept 6 small dogs inside. Peering into the house through frosted glass, she thought she saw movement, and her son thought that he could see the figure of a man inside. Emily decided to enter the house via a door in the garage, but for some inexplicable reason, she stopped, decided against it, and left. 50 minutes later, at 6:50 p.m, 46-year-old Terry Gonzales pulled into the driveway. No sooner had he entered the house when he too was attacked. Multiple stab wounds were inflicted to his neck, chest, back and abdomen. His defensive wounds suggested there had been a struggle, so he too would have seen who his attacker was. One of the stab wounds penetrated his right lung, another penetrated his heart, and another partially severed his spinal cord. Again, Sef tipped out the contents of his father's briefcase to make it look like a robbery. After killing his entire family, Sef showered, changed clothes, then spray painted the words "F off Asians" and "KKK" on a wall, in an attempt to fool investigating police into believing that his family had been victims of a hate crime. He removed a screen from a window outside to help make his story believable. Then he disposed of the murder weapons, the clothing, and a pair of size 7 running shoes he was wearing at the time of the murders. Sef then drove to a friend's house, arriving there about 8 p.m. The pair went to the Sydney CBD, where they ate at Planet Hollywood and visited a nearby video game arcade. Later in the evening, after dropping his friend off, Gonzales returned home. At 11:48 p.m, he called emergency services. He was smart enough to use the word shot rather than stabbed to convince police that he wasn't involved.
Please come! Someone has hurt my parents and my family.
Sorry?
Someone has shot my parents. Please come!
Someone's what?
Someone has shot my parents. I think they're all breathing. They're on the floor.
What suburb are you in?
They're not breathing. What do I do?
What suburb are you in?
North right.
North Ride. And your parents are both,
Not moving.
they're both been shot, have they?
I don't know. There's a lot of blood everywhere. It's my mom.
Just hold on. Yeah, we will. We're sending the ambulance now.
Sef then frantically ran to his neighbour's house, screaming that his parents had been shot. A second neighbour came out to see what the commotion was about. They ran to the Gonzales home, and what they found will haunt them both for the rest of their lives. In fact, the gruesome wounds inflicted on the bodies shocked even seasoned police and emergency service officers. Sef told police that he had seen two intruders running from the house as he pulled into the driveway. He said he chased but lost them. Then he asked if anyone had rosary beads so that he could pray over the bodies of his family. Sef also said that he'd hugged the bodies and tried to resuscitate them, and that he tried to prevent the flow of gushing blood from Claudine's side. But there was barely any blood on him, save for the soles of his shoes and small spots on his pants. And Claudine's wounds would not have been gushing blood almost 8 hours after she had died. As the news broke, hearts around the country went out to the young man who had lost his entire family in such a brutal way. Sef gave a press conference offering $100,000 from his father's estate to anyone with information, but not everyone was convinced by his performance. Many people felt uncomfortable and thought it strange when Sef broke into the song One Sweet Day while giving his family the eulogy.
Papa, Mama, Dida. Sorry, I never told you all I wanted to say. And I know eventually we'll be together one sweet day.
Relatives began to distance themselves from Sef, but didn't question him. The autopsies revealed that the victims had died between 4 and 7 p.m. When questioned as to his whereabouts between leaving his father's practice and meeting his friend at 8 p.m, Sef said he had been driving around the Blacktown area looking for the house of another friend, but he never found it. When told that his car had been seen in the driveway at 6 p.m. by his aunt, he changed his story and said he'd been embarrassed to admit that he'd taken a taxi to visit a prostitute. Within 72 hours of his parents' murders, Sef met his father's accountant to find out how much the estate was worth. It was valued at $1.5 million. He put deposits on a Porsche and a Lexus, telling the car dealers that he was expecting an inheritance very soon. Then he moved in to an 11th floor apartment in Chatswood, furnishing it with a yellow lounge from his parents' house. Sef had quickly made himself the #1 suspect to police, but they needed evidence. Not realising his phone was being tapped, Sef desperately called brothels to establish his alibi and tried to bribe a prostitute who worked at a Chatswood brothel to be his alibi witness. He also paid a taxi driver $50 to write and sign a dictated statement saying that he drove him to Chatswood that day, asking him to backdate it. Sef received $15,000 in victims' compensation, but it wasn't enough to fund his lavish playboy lifestyle until the estate was settled. He sold both his parents' cars without his grandmother's permission and tried to pawn his mother's jewellery. He also sent persistent emails to his aunt, Annie Paran, in the Philippines, who managed the Sef family affairs there, asking for money. He even created false death certificates on a computer to speed up the process. When this failed, He said he had a brain tumour and needed the money for medical expenses. This also failed. In the meantime, police continued to build a case against their suspect, and a search of Sef's computer showed that this may not have been his first attempt at murder. In February, before the murders, Sef had begun searching for poisonous plants on the internet and ordering lethal seeds. Searches he thought he had deleted from his computer. Just a week before the murders, his mother reported violently ill at the Sydney Adventist Hospital, saying she believed she had food poisoning. Sef also feigned a minor stomach upset, telling people he believed there may have been something in the tap water at a restaurant in which the family had dined. His mother recovered and returned home. It seems likely that he may have buried or thrown the remaining seeds into the backyard, because 3 years later a poisonous plant was found growing there. Police also discovered a shoebox in Sef's room that would have contained shoes that matched the type and size of the bloody footprints at the crime scene. They also uncovered a sweater which Sef had been wearing that night. It showed paint on the sleeve. A sample matched the same paint used in the racist graffiti scrawl on the wall in the home. On the 13th of June 2002, detectives arrested Gonzales. He was charged with 3 counts of murder. He was refused bail and held on remand in Silverwater Correctional Centre. Gonzales sought permission to access the family's estate to fund his defence and was denied. The trial began in April 2004. Gonzales pleaded not guilty, but evidence shown by the prosecutor saw a jury of 6 men and 6 women take just 4 hours to bring back a guilty verdict on all 3 counts. On the 17th of September 2004, just 1 day after his 24th birthday, Justice Bruce James sentenced Sef Gonzales to 3 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. In June 2007, Gonzales was granted approval to appeal his conviction and his sentence. The Supreme Court determined that statements taken from Gonzales by police on the night of the murders may have been inadmissible, as he was not cautioned. On the 27th of November 2007, the appeal was dismissed and his convictions remained. While a motive for the vicious murders of his own family have never been clear, it is widely believed that he committed the murders because he was fearful that, because of his poor performance in his university studies, his parents might take away his car and withdraw other privileges. He also wished to be the sole beneficiary of his parents' estate. As of 2020, Sef Gonzales maintains his innocence and continues to serve his sentence at the Goulburn Correctional Centre. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more murder, mystery and mayhem. Until next time.